This is Innovating Leadership, Co-Creating Our Future. I'm your host, Maureen Metcalf, founder and CEO of the Innovative Leadership Institute, where we help leaders be future ready. Helping us in that mission today is Deb Liu, President and CEO of Ancestry. We'll be talking about her take on leadership and how she's bringing her vision for Ancestry to life. Deb, thank you so much for joining us.
It's great to be here.
You have a vision of creating Ancestry for all. What does that mean, and what do you do to take it from an idea to manifesting it in reality for your employees and your customers?
Yeah, our mission statement is empowering journeys of personal discovery. And what we love is having people to be able to capture and learn about their family stories, their family history. And that hasn't always been easy, depending on your background, depending on where you're from, it might be easier or harder. And so part of the work that we want to do is actually enable it for everybody.
Dan and I were talking, our producer, before you jumped on, about some of his family's challenges in learning about their lineage. What are some examples of why it might not be available for all?
Well, part of the issue is, for example, there are people who come from communities and societies where, paper records are not really kept or not available. And that is really hard because a lot of our documentation is using and scanning from archives. It's actually taking family Bibles and parish records. It's working with governments who have captured and scanned that information to make it available to future generations. But there are a lot of communities for whom that's not true as well. Or, for example, for previously enslaved generations, before 1870, there's a large group of the population for whom there is no records at all because they were not considered part of the records of the United States. And so some of the things that we do, for example, is the work of, we have a new collection called the Articles of Enslavement, where pre-1870, we take newspaper articles where there are stories that capture where people are sold or people are transported. And some of that work is to document and not forget the history that we have, even before maybe governments are actually capturing that.
Now, I assume then someone who was enslaved in the U.S. could also potentially track their lineage back to their communities within Africa or wherever they originated.
Yes. Well, part of that is not just the records, but also DNA. DNA is such a powerful tool where we can connect people both with living relatives and matches, but also the community journey. Where are you from originally? How many generations ago did that community actually, come and where did they live and where did they enter the United States? We have a lot of that because of the scientific work we've been able to do to trace both origins, but also something we call community journeys, which is where did those from various places come and settle? What are the communities where we're seeing that DNA through the centuries? And so that we can bring it up to today.
That's fascinating. So can you tell me just a little bit more how that works behind the scenes? Because I don't think about maybe how I think about how the people traveled. So my parents are both from Indiana, of European ancestry. We can track some of that, but we don't think about they settled in Indiana, they met these people, they intermarried with part of our family is German, part is Scotch, part is Irish. There were originally people, I think, from Scotland, Ireland, and Germany who met somewhere and had children, and those children are then a mix, and then they met and married and mixed with other people. It seems like it would get pretty muddy pretty quickly.
Well, what's interesting is we think about our ancestors as individuals, but, migration happened in waves. Things like, I think an example is the Irish potato famine, where large waves of people entered the United States or traveled to other countries in order to build new lives. And you see that, that entire communities are built where people settled. Certain parts of, say, the Midwest are settled by German immigrants or Swedish immigrants. And you see that throughout history. There are folks who are French who went to Louisiana. And so these waves of migration create what we call community journeys. And these communities are what make us who we are today. And you're actually giving an example of how these communities intermarry and create your ancestors and your life today. But you can actually trace back and encoded in your DNA is that journey from where are you from originally? And then what communities have traveled through what places over the decades.
Brilliant. And so that's a little bit then of what it is. Can you talk a little bit about why knowing our lineage is so important to humans at this point in history? Because it does seem crucial to identity.
Yeah, we've done studies where it says even knowing the names of your grandparents, knowing their journeys builds resilience in kids. Understanding the stories of, we look at history as if it's so long past, and yet just really understanding the challenges that your own family faced and how they overcame that gave you the life you have today can actually make everybody in your family more resilient. And so it is so important that we just not look at the present, but that we are the history of thousands of people who made millions of decisions that bring us the life that we have today.
It does seem important. The phrase I really like is the arc of time. Mm-hmm. And when I can put things into context, that I may be having a bad day or a week or a month, but as I think about my life, and I'm not 20, so that arc of time is longer and I'm able to take more perspective. But then if I look at my family history, my grandmother lived on a farm during the Depression and they didn't have enough food, even though they were on a farm, to feed all the kids. So the kids went and worked with other families on other farms where they had sufficient food. Mm. That's a very different reality and experience than I've had. And I do hearken to some of those stories when I'm complaining about something way less important than can't feed my family.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think as you look at the history of your own family and the migration, you'll realize that, the amount of adversity that we have overcome as a country, as a family, as a community, it reminds us that we can do amazing things as well.
So tell me then, because we're talking about lineage, tell me a little bit about your background, because that's, I'm assuming, part of that background and things that you took from your heritage brought you to this job versus a job at Budweiser or someplace else.
I don't drink, so I guess Budweiser would be out. But yes, my grandmother and grandfather on my mother's side, they had actually not met before they married. So it was an arranged marriage. And this was very traditional at the time. My grandmother was not educated. She couldn't read, really. And she raised 7 children who were very successful and gone on to do amazing things, who live all over the world. And I just can't imagine that she could imagine the world would change so much in her lifetime before she passed. And so, I think about that, right? That you marry into a family not knowing where you're going to go and, and what your life is going to be like. And I think a lot about kind of how I carry that on to my own future generations, to my children, to my daughters and my son. And, the history of, my mom and my dad coming to America with a couple of suitcases, a few $100s, and then they had to make enough money to buy a ticket home. They came at a time when they applied to one school, they had never been to America, and they just showed up with a letter and they just lived an entire life completely away from their family. And the resilience that takes, the courage it takes to leave everything and everyone you've ever known to go to a country where you don't speak the language that well. And, wow. To go to college, to build a life. And in many ways, they lived the American dream, and they were so grateful for everything this country has been for them. But also they had so many dreams for their children and their grandchildren too.
I imagine they would be very proud of where their grandchildren are now.
Absolutely. So my father passed about 11 or 12 years ago. My mom passed away a few months ago. And before she passed, I actually had my daughter interview her. And, she shared how just, what a wonderful life she had had. And, how grateful she was for everything that she had a chance to experience.
What was she most proud of about you and your accomplishments?
We grew up in a small town in the deep South in South Carolina, and they lived an American dream. That they owned a home, had a couple of cars, and never they worried about making the mortgage, but they didn't struggle, and they wanted that for us. And so in many ways, that like the career that I had, the things I went on and had an opportunity to do in tech has been really surprising for them. I remember my dad saying to me the first time I got my first paycheck, at my first full-time job, he said, you make more money than I do, and you just graduated from college. And he had worked so hard as an engineer for the government. And so he's like, I'm so proud that you're able to succeed. That what we were, that's what parents want, is for your children to succeed greater than, what you could have imagined. And so, she was so gracious. She lived with us for many years, helped us with the kids, and she was very close to them. And I know that they know how much she loved them and wants the best for them as well.
And how wonderful to have multi-generations being close.
Yeah.
We were not geographically close. My dad was in the military, so we traveled or moved around. And I adored my grandmother and loved our visits home, but they happened once a year or twice a year.
But in a lot of ways, they're an anchor point for you as well, right? Someplace you go every year that it's going to happen.
Well, and what I learned, and I realize this is slightly off topic, but not entirely, because it is the word anchor point, and how I grew as a leader is absolutely informed by my grandmother. The person she was and the leader she was. She ran a flower shop. She had worked in a grocery store. That was so minimal education. I don't know that she graduated from high school. And yet she went on to have a job and then own a business. And when her husband was laid off, she was the primary wage earner for the rest of their lives. And so also just a different role for women than we've seen in some communities, that she was very much the matriarch.
That was true of my own grandmother. She was the matriarch after my grandfather passed. Both of my other three grandparents passed when they were quite a bit ago. But my grandmother, my grandfather had a successful business, and she went on to run it, even though she was not traditionally educated in the same way that we would expect. And so she was the matriarch of the family, and we went to see her and spend time with her. And I brought my kids to see her when they were young as well.
Did her journey inform what you saw as possible as a young woman in leadership?
Absolutely. I mean, she was able to accomplish so much from such humble beginnings, and to go through so much and to live the incredible life she had, to be able to, be the chair of the board of her husband's company, and to, help build it. And, when he passed in his 60s, he was quite young. And so she lived, and she really cared for her family, and her family became the center of her universe.
Back to things we don't necessarily consider on a daily basis, the impact our grandparents, our parents, our great-grandparents have on the model they pass down to us.
Yes.
And it's not just the college funding, it's the modeling of how they think about things.
My parents moved to the South, and my dad got a job in the government. And my mom, who had previously, had a job in a normal office, and she started working just part-time to make ends meet. And so, she worked at a Chinese restaurant, a fast food restaurant. She did so many things. She drove a bus. She was a salesperson. She just did all of these things. And I knew that she did it mostly because she wanted to be home with us. And so she would do things while we were, she would take these odd jobs, even though she's, again, she came to America for college. She had worked in a normal corporate job. But she said, I want to be able to cook you dinner and to be able to be home. And, that was a really big priority for her. And I saw that in how she organized her life.
And now you're a president and CEO, and you said you have two daughters.
Yeah.
How do you organize your life to be able to do, I don't know that any of us does it all, but to be able to do the things that are a priority at the time?
Well, I think there's a couple things. So one is, you pick the things that, as you said, like, anchor points, right? What are the anchor points in your life? For me, it was something that's so important. My mother-in-law, my mom, my grandmother, they all taught me how to cook. And so I cook every week for them. And if I'm traveling, I cook on Sunday and I store it up in the refrigerator, and, my husband just has to heat it up. And I cook their favorite foods. I have a list of things, and, and that's really important to me, that, food is how a lot of cultures, including my own, show love, as you know.
Mm-hmm.
And so for that, it's, I make sure that they feel loved that way.
That's
Other things, I have
beautiful.
an incredible partner. My husband is so great. I share this quote in my book. The most important career decision you make is who you marry. And it's so true. He has been my biggest supporter, and, when I wanted to go to business school, we were about to get married, and, he said, I'll follow you wherever you go. So I got into Stanford. We came out here. He put me through business school. And, we show what a true partnership looks like. And that's something that's so important to our kids, to see what a true partnership really looks like, the give and take of any relationship.
I love the point that the most important career decision you make is who you marry, because we don't think about our spouse as the biggest partnership we have.
Yes. But if you think about it, work and home are yin and yang, right? If one gets too big, the other has to take a smaller space, and vice versa. And to keep it in balance, having a partner to help you with the ebbs and flows is so important.
I don't want to go too much into my personal life, but I was single for a very long time after being married to a lovely man. No big story there. Just we took different paths. And now having someone who I also consider just to be a brilliant partner has made all the difference in my life.
Absolutely. And I think we underestimate, we don't talk about that, right? I guess women are more asked about that in interviews, but, success is not a solo game. That, every successful person has often a partner that is helping them. And we don't talk about that, right? We think we're a very individualistic society, but, I could not have achieved any of what I've done without my husband being such a cheerleader, a partner, somebody who has encouraged me to take on bigger jobs and to try new things, even when it was hard on him as well.
And it sounds like parents being involved as well in your case.
Well, one thing I think we underestimate is how important we talk about a village, right? That village is.
Yep.
And we sort of say, yeah, everyone has to do it alone. And not everyone has a village, but if you do, it makes your life so much easier. In many ways, I took care of my mom, but she also took care of us. She helped with so many things over the years, pick up and drop off, with cooking. And until she got very sick in the last 8 years, she was such an important part of actually helping the day to day. My in-laws were as well. And so I think we kind of write other people out of the story. A lot of these heroic heroes' journeys, like, you make it to the top, what did you do? And everyone says I, and everything's about what I did. But what they don't talk about is the invisible groups of people that help you and make these things possible. And I hope that we can bring that out of the shadows and talk more about it, because I think it does a disservice to, say, women earlier in their career saying, well, I can't do all of that. How can she do this? When I said, no, we bring the people who supported us out of the shadows. And we say, you can do it, but you need a village. You need a community. You need people to trade babysitting with. You need people to help you pick up your kids and do carpool with you. Those things are all such an important part of what we do. And yet we just pretend that it never happened.
To your point of village, it doesn't have to be genetically related. It's the chosen village.
Absolutely. And there's so many families that we've, babysat with them, and they babysat us, our kids, or there's, we do carpool with a lot of other families, and I think that it doesn't have to be, not everyone has a family that lives close by, as you said, but you can have neighbors and community members, people who help support you. Those are so invaluable.
I live in a community now that is a larger city, but a small community. And we've got people with young kids. We've got retired folks. We've got people still working in the true grind of long hours and days. And it's interesting to watch how people ebb and flow together, and how beautiful it is to watch someone's in the hospital and people come together, or new child, people come together, or just out walking dogs and making sure people are feeling well. It adds so much to the texture of life, which then does allow us to go back to work feeling supported. And I think we underestimate the importance of that emotional support and community.
Absolutely. And I think often, so I talk about in my book, the four kinds of allies. There's mentors and sponsors, your team, but the last one is your circle, right? Who makes the rest of your life possible? Who is the one you go to when you have a problem, when you have an emergency? Who's the one who pick you up and you're down? And I think that so many communities. I think one of the biggest challenges we've had is we're more increasingly isolated, and it's that community that where you can rely on each other, where you can build on each other. That's so critical, and I think that that's something we lack in modern day, because I think people build communities online, but they can't pick you up from the hospital if something happened and you need to discharge, or pick up your dog from the kennel if you're running late. Right? These are things that we need our neighbors and physical, our friends to support each other.
And tying that back to leadership, things like the Gallup research saying people who have a best friend at work are much more likely to be engaged. Yeah. Leaders often talk about it being lonely at the top. What's our network or group of peer-related leaders that we interact with? Because we all do have bumpy spots. And yes. How do we share and look for intellectual support and emotional support?
Absolutely. And I think it's that, I'm in a couple lean in circles, and we're doing an event tomorrow where we're going hiking. And it's just a chance for us to talk about our work, but talk about our families. And, all of us we all worked together previously, and now we've gone on to different jobs. And, that circle is so precious because it gives us a chance to connect and communicate, but also vent and get support. And, it's part of carrying each other through difficult times in our lives, whether it's difficult times at work or marriage or kids. We've seen each other through so much. And we did a reflection the last time we met, and somebody was talking about their son and all the things that their son is doing. And I said, can we stop for a second and think back to a few years ago and where this child was, and how far they've come. And, I think sometimes we forget that people both to carry you through the difficult times, but also to celebrate how far our kids have come, how far our marriages have come, or our careers. I think we miss a lot of that.
It's a beautiful point to think about back the theme of arc of time, and that allowing us to keep perspective and identify. It just feels like the theme of our interview is community. Yeah. And the importance of time and connection, whether it's lineage and ancestors generations back, or support circle that is not biologically related, but still community related.
Yeah, definitely. And it's, one of the things that I love about Ancestry is that you're looking back at your history, but you also find new connection points to communities that you didn't know about. You find connections to events or people or to places that maybe you didn't know your family traversed. And so it gives you a new sense of your place in the world.
So let's go back to a couple questions about Ancestry. Ancestry's recently released at-risk records collections. What is an at-risk collection, and why is that so important to Ancestry as a company and to your customers?
Yeah, we do a great effort to commit dollars. We're committing $3 million next year to continue to look for and digitize lost and kind of records that might actually be gone someday. I mean, records, as you know, over time degrade, right? Mm-hmm. We have records from the Freedmen's Bureau, which happened in kind of the late 1800s. And so you think about what those records look like today. And if we're one flood or fire away from losing all of those records from the Freedmen's Bureau, the Freedmen's Bank, for example, of previously enslaved people. The same thing with the Japanese internment camps, the records of what happened there, to bear witness to, a time in our history when, especially in California, where, people of Japanese descent were incarcerated, imprisoned, in internment camps. And, for the only crime, they're American citizens or people with green cards, but their only crime was their descent. People have been here generations and all that they lost. And so what we do is we actually look for these records and we go out and we digitize them and we make them available so that people can find their own family history and stories there as well.
It seems also important for our understanding our heritage. And I think about, as individual humans, we've got things that we in the psychology space call shadow. So it's all the stuff I don't share with you about myself, that I got angry with somebody, and all the icky stuff. And yet owning that as part of who I am allows me to be a much more effective person. I don't necessarily run around sharing the worst thing I did, even after a couple drinks. But I need to own and know that I've got, hopefully, resounding strengths, but also weaknesses, and connecting with that allows me to have empathy for people struggling and act with humility, many of the behaviors we want from leaders. If we look at that same construct as a country, do we own the worst of our heritage along with the best of our heritage, and acknowledge the actions that were taken by people before we were born, but they still inform who we are as a culture?
Absolutely. And a lot of, what happened over the generations continue to impact us today. It's not just enslavement, but after enslavement, there was redlining, in the 1950s and 60s. And that affects the quality of the schools that our children go to because of choices that were made by multiple generations ago, actually. And so you look at that and you look at the choices and impact that carries on. And a lot of what we want to do is make sure that history is preserved so that the individual stories of people don't go away, that we don't lose the records, and that they're available to everybody to look back on and say, hey, this was a moment in our history where we did something maybe we were not proud of, but we can, out of this is what we learned. And here's, let's remember the names of those who were impacted. Often in history, we write stories about large groups of people, but there were individuals who lived through that history. And a lot of us, what we try to do is actually give actual names to people who lived through those things in our societies so that we don't forget.
And in some cases, we can celebrate that we're now building statues and acknowledging people who were previously invisible.
Yes, absolutely.
So then let's talk about AI and Ancestry. It's such a big topic now. And for Ancestry, it's not a new topic. And in your career, I assume it's not a new topic.
Yeah. Well, AI is such a powerful tool. And often we think AI just appeared last year. I think generative AI actually has made huge advances in the last year. But if you look back, AI has been a part of a lot of what we do for a long time. For example, at Ancestry, 1940, we actually, 72 years after the 1940 census, we put it out. And it took us 9 months and millions of dollars to scan and index. We had armies of people to help index it. And if you look at the 1950 census, which actually happened a couple of years ago, we did it in days. Because of our handwriting recognition, advances in our ability to categorize what was shown. And so it's really incredible what AI has been able to make possible, which is enabling us to drive forward and innovate, but also scan records that maybe, would have been outside of our purview before because it was too expensive to process. And so, a lot of old records are actually handwritten, in which case, having to manually key in what it was very, very expensive and difficult. And so now we can actually take records that maybe were inaccessible to us before because we couldn't easily index them and make it possible. And so AI is such a powerful tool, and I'm very excited to see, where it takes us. We have used AI for a number of things. We're now testing it with translation so that we can actually translate into more languages, our site into more languages, making it more accessible to different communities. And so it has brought down the cost, but it's also made it so much faster and accessible to so many more people.
Yeah, I was fascinated. My dad was doing genealogy, and he had gone to the graveyards and the courthouses and the National Archives and all the stuff. And then for years, maybe decades. And then I get on Ancestry and all this stuff is there. Like you've got stuff about me that I don't have about myself because I didn't save it. And so it is fascinating that if my own records retention is bad, like my marriage certificate since I'm divorced, I may not have kept that, but I went on Ancestry and found it.
Yeah.
It's just fascinating um, and my marriage certificate isn't that interesting, but back to the old courthouse records, things my dad had been trying to figure out for years, I
Yeah.
was able to figure out pretty quickly.
Yes, absolutely. Well, the other part is, just for what you're talking about records is, every family has that shoebox of family memories. They have
Hmm.
not scanned, they haven't digitized, but they're thinking about it. It's a someday project, right? It's like
Yep.
someday I'm going to do this. And I was started to do this with my mom when she got sick, and we were scanning the photos. I was trying to get her categorized, and then she passed away, and someday became too late in a lot of ways. And so,
Hmm.
one of the things we do is when you scan those photos, you might not recognize a lot of people in the photos because
Yeah.
it might be your dad's best friend from high school. One of the things that we can do is actually help you, figure out who those people are. Maybe it's your great, someone else might have scanned a picture of your great grandfather, but you didn't know that. But we actually have an archive of people who have been previously tagged by another customer. And someone else says, "Oh, this is my great grandfather standing next to yours," And so we can use AI in such interesting ways to actually help identify people that might not be seen in those photos. So some of the work we do is actually going to be able to unlock the mysteries that you might have in a shoebox in your garage right now.
That's fascinating. And when my mom passed, I passed all those shoe boxes to my brother. So now it's my job to go get them back. And
Yeah, you need to go get them back and scan them because, again, as I said, one flood or fire away from all of these
yeah,
things going away. And I worry a lot about that, which is, we have addicts full of these things. And yet, when we scan them and we attach them to a tree, then now they're actually visible to other people who are related as well. So your cousins would be able to see, photos, for example, of maybe your great grandfather that they had never seen as well.
beautiful. Thank you. So, as we're moving toward the end of our interview, one last question before we go into how do people find you. You are now president and CEO. You've got a team of people working for you. I find that leaders who have been very deliberate with their leadership teams are much more able to lead the organization they want to lead. And so, what characteristics do you look for in the team that works well with you?
Yeah.
And a little bit of why.
Well, first and foremost is a learning mindset. If your attitude is we've always done it this way, that's not the right attitude because things are changing all the time. Technology is changing, things are evolving. So really, I love people who are willing to think outside the box and not just say, "Hey, we used to do it this way, but what are ways that we can step function do it better?" The other part is, a team is only as good as the team together. Often, we're not playing a solo sport here. Companies are actually a team sport. And so the quote from my head of HR is, "Are you playing for the name on the front of the jersey or the one on the back?" And
Mm.
it's so important that, what we do is, you could be the best violinist and someone else could be the best trombonist. But if you're half a beat off, it sounds like a cacophony. And, one of the things is not just having superstars, but people who are able to work together and make beautiful music. And I think sometimes we value often the superstar over actually the ability to work together, to the ability to up level each other, the ability to build towards what our customers want.
And that sounds like the theme that you've talked about, but also I think that you live in things you've said that the community matters. The community of peers, the community of people that are on working teams, our family communities, our village. In
Yes.
every instance, that collective that informs our lives.
Yes, absolutely.
Whether, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I was just saying that. Okay, why don't we go back? Once you finish.
That it's at every point you talked about the invisible contributors. Who are the people who got me here? My partner, my parents, former colleagues who were incredibly supportive. I'd never be here without people I learned from, some good, some not so good, but they got me here.
Yeah, I think we think that we always look at our own effort, but we don't see like all the people that carried us along the way. I was doing this mentorship post. Somebody asked us for back to school to do a mentorship post, and I shared it about my high school teacher, Miss Ashburn, and how she made it seem possible for me to, she told me like you can do anything you want, you can accomplish anything. And I was a kid in some small town, and I said, what do you mean? And so I thanked her, and recently I reached out to her and I thanked her. And I think sometimes we don't remember all the people who carried us along the way, all the communities that we were part of, all of the people who just took the time to inspire us or to help us and lend a hand when we needed it most. And so, I want that for our team at work, which is, how do we lift each other up? How do we help each other? And then how do we build towards something greater? Because, individuals, you play an individual sport, but, we are actually corporations and companies are team sports.
And we are often inhibited by the structure of the organization and the recognition systems that we reward individuals, and then we're surprised that we don't get team performance.
Yes. Well, whatever you reward, you get more of, right? And whatever you praise, especially as those of you who praise children know that whatever you praise, you get more of as well. And so, what we do and what we look for in other people and what we reward, we will sow more of those seeds and yield more of that, good and bad.
Deb, thank you so much. I love your insight, and I wish we could talk much longer. How would people learn more about Ancestry if they don't already know a lot about you, or people who didn't recognize that you're adding collections, that even if they were members of Ancestry years ago, that this is a new experience now?
Well, Ancestry is changing every day. We're releasing new collections every month. We have new records. We also add new functionality every single month as well. And so we're continuing to push forward on innovation. So if you've tried it before, you give us another shot. And if you haven't done some work around your family history, we encourage you to pick up a DNA kit to kind of get a shortcut into kind of seeing more about your family history, the communities you're from, but then also come and build out your family story, capture your images, scan your photos, be a part of, telling the story of your family.
If people want to learn more about your story, where would they connect, or either follow or connect?
Yeah, so Deb Liu at Substack. So I have a Substack where I write every week. And if you reply to it, it goes to my email. So sign up for the newsletter and then you can reach out.
Deb, thank you very much.